Good morning, everyone, and we welcome you to our third installment of our Connect series with the Central Florida Tech Grove and hosted by the NTSA. We appreciate you coming and joining us for today's session. I think you'll be really engaged with these two fellows that are actually coming out of the incubation period and maturation period, and now are moving into the full-on commercialization. And today with us is a team that has really done a fantastic job. You know, it's been a long road. I'm sure they're going to go into some details and tell you a bit more about what it takes to move from that initial idea that started off with combat casualty care, that defining that problem, exploiting that problem in terms of congressional support and military support, and then designing and building the application, and now going into commercial and delivering it to the Defense Health Agency. So they're going to kind of go through the whole spectrum of what that looked like. And there are some real good key points that we're really going to kind of dig into details on. Like, I think most people in this audience would be curious to know about the SaaS model that they're using and how they've pioneered that and are leveraging that to change the way the Department of Defense and looks at software solutions and looks at how we design and build applications going forward. So we're real happy to have these guys here. We've got Colin Forward with Allogy, who's the software application and the developer of the tool, and supported by Matt Hackett, who is the doctoral component behind that, and really was behind the gaming and the building out of the application and supporting it that way. And these two guys are really super knowledgeable about what they're doing, very enthusiastic. So we're going to allow them to tell us their story. And then, like always, we turn this into more of a conversation towards the end, where we get into more of the question and answer, that we talk a little bit more about the solutions, and we give the audience an opportunity to jump in there and, ask questions. And so in the chat session, we'll be monitoring. We have several people on the back end here that are looking at your questions. So as things pop up and you want to have a circle back to, please post those in your question side. The chat is used predominantly for conversing between yourselves or conversing with us on the presenting side. But if you have specific questions, please use the Q&A as the place to post your questions there. So with that, we're going to go ahead and turn it over, and we're going to talk about combat casualty care, the training success story, really looking at that blended learning and that content delivery. And we're going to get into some of those details. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Colin here. Gentlemen?
Sure, thanks, Kevin. And thank you, everyone at NTSA for having us today. I really appreciate the opportunity to tell our story a little bit. It's definitely still developing, but this is an interesting time to be giving an update on this 11-year-long journey we've been on now. So I'll give you a little bit of background. We started Allogy at Institute for Simulation and Training down in Orlando. I'm in Denver now. And it was a spin-off from the METAL lab, the Mixed Emerging Technology Integration Lab. And the PI for that lab, David Metcalf, was a mentor and is a mentor to me and to David Rogers, who's the CEO emeritus of Allogy. And at that lab, we were studying the difference between mobile technology. And for context, this is 2009, 2010. iPhone came out in 2007. Android came out in 2008. So there were smartphones before that, but this was a time when we knew sea change was coming, and we wanted to help people understand what was different, what was better, and what was maybe not as good about mobile technology compared to traditional desktop technology. And we worked in a lot of different areas, but the main focuses ended up being in distance learning and mHealth. So early on, it's interesting how any of you who have worked in a lab probably have some of this experience where you're doing things on an R&D basis, and now 10 years later, when we're actually taking things to market, we're seeing that people are ready for some of these. But early on, we were doing a lot of prototyping projects with some of the groups you see on the screen. This was an example of a geofencing application where you would have two salespeople for new cars get into a car, and as they went on a route, the passenger was navigating. As they came up to a quick stop, it would teach them about the new braking system, or if they came around a sharp corner, it would teach them about the new suspension. So we were experimenting with some of these ways that we could provide information to people in the course of their work, and try out new styles of pedagogy that really made the most of the strengths of mobile technology. Based largely on the network at IST and the Metal Lab in particular, we did end up focusing a lot on healthcare. So you can see some apps here that we did for everything from an urgent care clinic to this on the right is actually, strangely enough, a precursor for deployed medicine. Early days when we were trying to figure out how we could support humanitarian aid missions in partner nations. Also, we did some early work for the federal government, doing an app for the Federal Register, and then also helping with the June area survey for USDA. So at this time, we were building a lot of different applications, and we didn't really have anything that was scalable. It was more of like a services and R&D shop. But over the course of a lot of these projects, we ended up building some tools that were helpful for us to build these applications more rapidly. And over time, what we've done is start to turn those tool sets outward facing. And that's how now you have the Joint Trauma System using Capillary to build and manage deployed medicine. You can find deployed medicine on iOS and Android app stores. You can go to deployedmedicine.com. And all of the content there is built by this third party on our Capillary platform, which started out as just like I said, a CMS that was helpful for us to bootstrap some of these projects. And then over the course of that work with JTS, led largely by Matt Hackett, we were able to build this out into a really robust enterprise training app platform. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Matt, and we can talk. Oh, ahead of myself. So one thing I did want to share about Capillary, why this is different, why having a research focus, I think really helped us distinguish ourselves in this learning space, because who needs another LMS, right? There are a ton of LMSs out there. Some of them are free. They can be hosted or co-located. But what we did was go from using the classroom model, which was really typical for desktop LMSs, like you're probably familiar with Blackboard or Canvas, where they take this approach that sort of assumes that the information is out there, and you just need to find an instructor to deliver that information. And that works in a lot of times with academics, where you're teaching calculus or history or something where it is more of a public record. But the use case that we started targeting is unlocking the expertise that exists within organizations, because there are experts within large groups. DoD, great example, that need to get to a large audience, and they have a very hard time making sure that there's a standardized way to get content that can be trusted out to that distributed audience. So what we did was zoom out a little bit and say, instead of just having all of the content management happen within the classroom, we separated those two things out so that instructional designers and subject matter experts can build standards-based content and then equip a distributed team of instructors around the globe to deliver that content. And I'm sure Matt will get into a little bit of the reasoning behind that, but basically the goal was to enhance standardization in training delivery, and make sure that the content was evergreen, it was always up to date. So at that point, I think this is a good time to turn it over to Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. So just a quick where I sit. So I'm with the Army Futures Command, DevCom, specifically the Soldier Center, and I'm based down at the STTC, which is in Orlando, Florida. And so I'm an S&T manager doing medical simulation research. And so we take ideas from maybe the Medical Center of Excellence or the Defense Health Agency, and we address their problems through research and development. And so this gets into the use case that we found that ended up pulling Allogy in and the Capillary tool, as well as the University of Miami and the Ryder Trauma Center. And so a little background on military healthcare training if you're not familiar. So in the military, we really train healthcare roles really much across the board, I would say, from a first responder all the way through a trauma surgeon. And specific to combat casualty care, that covers everything from a point of injury where a casualty occurs through transport, and then ultimately to some sort of healthcare facility where you'll have definitive care. And the way that we parse this out, it starts with tactical combat casualty care. You'll often refer to that as TC3 or T-Tri-C. That is the point of injury care. It's the standard that the U.S. military utilizes for point of injury care. En route combat casualty care is care in the air or in a ground ambulance. And then surgical combat casualty care is when you have a surgeon and you're in maybe a forward surgical team or in some sort of combat support hospital. So focusing on our TCCC use case here, TC3 is taught to a really wide training audience. It's taught at the self-aid, buddy aid level all the way through advanced providers, maybe like a soft medic, for instance. And that training includes standard didactic training. So this is your classroom knowledge-based training. You have individual skill stations where you learn the psychomotor skills, your hands-on skills. And then there's always some culminating exercises like small group lane training where you move through a tactical environment, you encounter casualties along the way, and you have to treat them. They use lots of different training aids for this, human patient simulators, part task trainers, virtual sims, and mobile tools. And TC3 has really seen a great proliferation across the Department of Defense. When we did our very initial sort of look across the different curriculums that were out there, we found that over 59 courses had incorporated TC3 in one way or another, which is great. But it's sort of a double-edged sword, so to speak, because with so many people grabbing TC3, there was a very non-standardized implementation across the services. So even within the service, even within the Army, TC3 is taught different ways at different locations. If you're at Fort Hood, if you're at Fort Benning, they just teach their own little flavor to it. And that's even worse when it's with multiple services. And so we would have varying levels of medical readiness because instructors are emphasizing different learning objectives. And then we have non-uniform assessment. So we don't have a good way of getting any enterprise level metrics of readiness or proficiency for the people who are going through TC3 training because they're all being assessed in a different way. And so this really leads us to the problem. And we ran a big survey asking somewhere in the range of 1,300 medics how they found their TC3 information and how they got trained in TC3. And over 52% indicated that they search once then less per year. So they almost never were looking for it outside of their standard classroom environment. And they didn't really know where to find it. Did they stay current? 54% said they waited for a refresher, so they were never dipping back in. And the answer is, how do we know if they're ready? Is we weren't really sure. There weren't those good enterprise level measures of effectiveness. And so what we would like to see is something like this. And so the current readiness is there on the top, and you'll see some real peaks and valleys there, where you have a peak of readiness in terms of your knowledge, skills, and ability right after you get your initial training. And then if you get some pre-deployment training, you'll have another big peak. But in the interim periods there, you have some real valleys where you dip into knowing, far less than you really should. Your readiness is not quite where we would like it to be because of knowledge and skills decay. If there's new guidelines, it becomes even worse because you're not aware that there's maybe a change in the equipment or a change in doctrine. And what we would like is more on the bottom, where you still will have variation, of course, but we have the tools and the resources available to make sure that people continuously can get access to content so that their readiness never really dips below what we would consider an acceptable level of proficiency. And so this brings us to sort of our rapid innovation, our push to start to get this done. And so we teamed up with the Defense Health Agency and their innovation and strategy group there. and another scientist, her name was Cynthia Berrigan, and I were sort of co-PIs when we started this out. And we sought to combine modern learning science with a delivery platform that felt familiar to next-gen users. So we looked at things like Khan Academy and TED and YouTube and said, that's the kind of content that you're likely to ingest outside of a formal learning environment. And then we said, we also need to leverage all the media channels. We know that next generation or younger trainees are not likely to just sit in front of a computer. They want to access things on their phones, through social media. So we really need to utilize all the media channels that are available to us to make sure that we can maximize engagement. And so that pulled us to the Capillary platform, which really started to check a lot of those boxes. It did require some additional development to make sure it fit our use case, but it had the foundation that we needed to deliver that content across all of those platforms in a seamless way. Supplementing that, we had to have the other piece of the other side of the coin, which is the content itself. And so we teamed up with the University of Miami, the Ryder Trauma Center down there, as well as the Army Trauma Training Center. And we generated some really high quality and useful content for TC3. So things like how-to style videos that felt more like what you would see on YouTube, that were very useful for job support or just-in-time training, something that you would see as just a really useful resource. And one of the big keys to success was that all of these videos were vetted and promoted by what I would consider the TC3 Training Authority, which is the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care. They are the ones who release the guidelines for TC3. It's a committee comprised of surgeons and medics who are really the guiding body for tactical combat casualty care. The services take those guidelines and turn it into doctrine, but by having the COTC review and push that stuff out, it meant that we had a stamp of authority. This stuff was good, and you knew it was good because the COTCs looked at it. And the other big thing that we pushed was really getting it into the hands of the users as quickly as possible. So from contract award to having a prototype in the user's hands at Fort Hood in their medical simulation training center was less than 4 months. That tells you a lot. I mean, number one, it tells you that it was a good pairing and that Capillary really fit the bill for what we were trying to do very early on. But it also was a key to success because it helped us identify a lot of things that we were either missing, either a bug in the code, something like that, which always happens, but also realizing that as a scientist or an engineer, you don't always have a great bead on what an end user needs. You think you know, but until you put it in their hands, you really don't know. And so we focused a lot on making sure we did early and often user tests, and I think it ended up being pretty successful. So that program went on for, about 2 years. And as it was kind of coming towards its end, we kind of had this big catalyst, which is DoD Instruction 1322.24 for medical readiness training. And this mandated that everyone in the services, whether you are a Navy culinary specialist or a drone pilot, all the way through, a soft medic, you had to have some flavor of TC3 training. It was now a mandate. And so because we had this delivery platform and because we were already making really great content, tag you're it. We got, picked to fulfill this requirement for the Defense Health Agency. And this meant we needed to sort of go back to the drawing board a little bit and do this in a little bit more of a, I guess you would say, regimented fashion. And I'm not going to go through all of these steps, but this was our instructional design approach. It's outlined in the paper in a lot more detail if you're interested. But we had to start with a baseline for how TC3 is taught across the services. We had to do an assessment plan to figure out what are the learning objectives that we're looking at and how will we measure them. And then we had to do an instructional strategy. What is the mix of video and didactic and slides that we need to impart the knowledge, skills, and abilities associated with those learning objectives? And then we built the content. That's step 5. And step 6 is really a very, very big one, which is we knew we wanted this training to be appropriate for sort of core initial training for performance support, or sustainment training. And because of those three use cases, it really necessitated a pretty robust mobile platform. And that's where deployed medicine / Capillary really come into play. And then all of this feeds back into the learning analysis, where we have the learning and the data that can feed back in, and we can make adjustments as we need to. And so when we did our front-end analysis, we found that there's lots of barriers to TC3 learning, everything from a lack of a good delivery platform to the usability of the content. It wasn't suitable for mobile devices, as well as where it was located. Discovery is a big one. It was scattered before across the web. It was on health.mil. It was on the North American EMT website. And now we have the one-stop shop. Go to deployedmedicine.com, or you download the app, and that is where you need to be for TC3. It's as simple as that. And so that really solved a lot of these barriers as we went through them. And when we developed this content, we had to structure it into a tiered curriculum. So tier 1 is like an all-service member level. This is very similar to self-aid buddy aid. Tier 2, combat lifesaver. Tier 3, combat medic or corpsman. And tier 4 is an advanced provider. Tier 5 and beyond is surgical or en route care. Right now, we've developed and delivered tiers 1 and 2, and tier 3 will be delivered this summer. So that continues along very, very nicely on the content side. And this brings us back to the delivery platform. So as this has gone on, deployed medicine has been under constant development, basically. We've continued to iterate and improve it throughout the entire duration of this research and development period. So as Colin mentioned, it's on iOS, it's on Android, it's on web. It can host a variety of different materials, and it uses both a cloud or a local library. So you can download that content if you need to onto your device. If you're likely to be deployed in a very austere place, you could download those things beforehand. So even if you're disconnected, you can still get the training material you need. We've seen tremendous usage. Those numbers are actually a little bit old now, but we are over 75,000 app downloads, considerably over it actually.
About twice that.
Yeah, so those numbers are a little old. I missed that when I updated this slide, but we have somewhere in the range of 30,000 active users every month, which is terrific. And the sort of groundswell from the user community has been tremendous in terms of grabbing this and wanting to use it. And Colin, I'll turn it over to you a little bit if you want to chime in on some of the capabilities that we've developed along the way.
Sure. Well, and I know you have some more slides too, but what I will say about this is we could not imagine a better development partner for building this type of platform. And there's a few reasons for that. First, I have to commend Matt and Cynthia earlier on for bringing in people who were experts in their field and letting them, giving them the agency to shape how the development was done over time. And then also being flexible as that development went on. There are very few test populations that are more motivated than combat medics. They really want to know this stuff. And so they were very eager and provided excellent feedback. And we were able to incorporate that feedback into the development that we did on an ongoing basis, which I think is, in my experience, really unique in government contracting and in software development for federal agencies.
Yeah, that's a great point, Colin. So we made sure that the users had a voice in terms of what were the priorities for capabilities that we would develop in this. And I'll use a good example. So as we went on in this project, it became clear that one of the big challenges to being able to implement TC3 across the services was going to be instructor workload. And some of the things that take a lot of instructor time are test administration, as well as assessment of the psychomotor skills. You have these skill stations and instructors looking over you, and they have some form of a checklist. And we realized pretty early on that if we could digitize a lot of these things and offload some of that from the instructor, it would be very, very useful. And so we've built that into the platform on the back end, and it just makes it much simpler now for the instructor who already has their students going to deployed medicine. They're already going to deployed medicine. And again, it creates that sort of one-stop shop ecosystem for your training needs, at least in terms of TC3. And so one of the key aspects to Capillary and to deployed medicine is the notion that we early on identified this as a really good candidate to use software as a service. And a SaaS platform, since it's mobile, since it's cloud-based, it's centrally hosted, it made a lot of sense to use SaaS as the mechanism for contracting this and for achieving this capability. But SaaS and the government don't always go hand in hand. SaaS is kind of a new thing, and the government isn't always great at adopting new things in any reasonable time frame. And so there's been some challenges in terms of selling senior leadership on the idea that SaaS is the right plan. And a few of the ways that we did this was to make sure that they understood the flexibility that SaaS provides. By not having to do some huge upfront software development cost that then has a really long train of maintenance at the end of it, you have what is generally a larger maintenance cost that's just spread over many years, with a much smaller initial investment. And so that gives you a lot more flexibility in your out years to make changes. And in such a rapidly changing domain like cloud computing and mobile, it made a lot of sense to make sure that we had that flexibility and that we used this to really enable what would be the best value for the government. The other piece that is a real challenge there is security, and that is still an ongoing challenge. And I stepped on Colin there, so let me toss it over to Colin because he was going to chime in.
No, my fault. I thought that was a good time. But yeah, the security bit, that's one of those areas where sometimes it's not best to be first, which I think we're kind of doing with some of the groups we're doing our risk management framework with now. Second or third might be a little bit better, but we're getting through it. The government has actually been very helpful in getting through this process with a different approach to software development. But I did want to say about SaaS, one of the things that we wanted to promote as far as the value proposition of SaaS software acquisition is, as you'll see in some later slides, this platform is going to continue to grow and to develop because we're able to we solve this problem in a generalized fashion, right? And we continue to add value to it in a generalized fashion. And now we're seeing growth in the private sector. So large hospitals, businesses, police departments are starting to adopt Capillary, and as they do, that's additional funding that keeps the platform new and state of the art, and the government gets to benefit from that. Unlike some of the huge acquisitions that meant co-locating something at a federal building and having a IT contracted IT staff to manage those programs for 10 years, and then the transition comes up and they have to retain that team for another year to make the whole transition over to this new platform. So we do see this as an opportunity for the taxpayer to get higher value for the investment that the government is making in some of these software tools.
Yeah, that's a terrific point, Colin. And I think the best value argument is the one that makes the most sense to senior leaders. And when we can say, hey, look, there were these other capabilities that got developed outside of what we paid for, but they still get rolled into our baseline because we're all utilizing this software as a service foundation. It's very appealing, and it makes it so that your platform is much more agile and really is able to sort of accumulate additional capability in a way that otherwise you would not. So in general, I think that has been very lucrative thus far in our development, and I would expect that it will continue through transition. Look at that. So full disclosure, this is not my slide. I took this slide, but it's such a terrific slide that I just wanted to put it up there. And so transition is always a real challenge for both the S&T and the acquisition community. And too often you end up having an S&T project that's successful, that dies on the vine. And then the acquisition community still says, oh, this is still a need. And they just come in and do some sort of commercial buy of just whatever sort of semi-fits the bill, rather than doing a proper transition where you do advanced development and ultimately end up with a product that is, really the best for the end user and is the most efficient use of taxpayer dollars. One of the things that we did really early on was identify our transition partner, who is the DHA J4, their component acquisition executive, more specifically, the program manager for medical simulation and training, PMMST. They're based in Orlando as well, run by Jude Tomasello, and they've been terrific. And so from a very early stage, we made sure that we identified, who that would be. We pulled them into our IPTs, our integrated product team meetings, to make sure that they had a say in how things went. So one of the things that we changed was to make sure that we started the RMF process earlier, because often they get dumped a product that they can't field for a long time because that RMF process hasn't started. And so by having them in the loop as early as possible on the S&T side of things, it allowed them to shape a product that they could field rather than just shape a product, through the S&T community that then just drops it on their doorstep and says, hey, here's your thing, figure out what to do with it. And that ended up being much more successful for us, but it did require, a fair amount of flexibility. And Colin, maybe you could chime in, because I know you guys sort of had to navigate you have multiple cooks in the kitchen there, and you had to sort of parse out how to handle those multiple input streams.
As far as RMF?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge is that, again, a lot of these offices, and I mean, there's been so much movement with all of the different stakeholders in this project. It was shortly before deployed medicine was a thing. JTS was at Army, and PMMST was JPM. There's been a lot of movement. And same goes with the cloud security offices. And so, luckily, I think one thing that we have working for us is that it's something that Matt's kind of helped us block and tackle for, is that as a R&D project, this horse kind of left the barn a little early. We've got over 100,000 downloads for an app that's technically not out of R&D yet, but people are depending on it. It's offering a lot of value, and I think that's been really helpful to motivate people to figure out how to get around some of the outdated processes that they're used to. And then the customer education piece, I'll call it, that's been really difficult is Capillary is what's called a multi-tenant system. So when someone creates an account with Capillary, like the deployed medicine account or the NYP account or the LAPD account, they get we call it a Capillary branch. It's its own tenant, its own instance of the system. And it was very hard for us to get the security officers to wrap their head around the idea of credentialing the entire Capillary system instead of just the deployed medicine application. And we wanted to make sure that they could do that because there are other people within the DoD. There are other, areas of excellence, other brain trusts that can leverage the platform. So it's definitely been a long process. I think timelines are expected to get extended, but a lot of it is because people have been working really hard to accommodate this new model of software acquisition, and that's worked to our advantage.
Yeah, terrific points, Colin. And you mentioned it, which is the train kind of left the station in the sense of we wanted this to sort of be a living laboratory, we called it, where we put this thing out into the wild, let people use it so that we could get their feedback and make it better as quickly as possible. Really, going for that agile, rapid prototyping type approach. And because it had such a great groundswell, on this slide, one of the perceptions of the acquisition community is that there's the lack of incentives to sort of pull things across. But when you have such a great user base already, it really sort of makes the value proposition very simple. Look, you've already got a user community that wants to use this. You've got a great use case. You just have to, finish pulling it across the finish line. And that made it a much easier sell in the sense of transitioning than it might otherwise be. So I guess sort of my long story short there is, the sooner you can get it into the hands of the users, the better off you are, because it allows you to refine your product and really make sure that your user base is as engaged as possible. And I think we now sort of segue into some more of Colin's slides and some of the sort of the future work and what we're kind of looking at.
Yeah, I can go through these pretty quickly. I just wanted to share some of the things that are happening in the, not all of it's private sector, but outside of the DoD, now that Capillary has gotten to a really mature place. And a lot of it is us learning from people who are adopting this technology and showing us new ways that they can implement novel mobile learning pedagogy. So this one is the New York Presbyterian Journey of Excellence app. They just recently used this Capillary app to recertify for their nursing magnet. They have campuses all around New York, and they all nurses use this app to onboard and then to maintain their skills and proficiencies over time so they can practice at the top of their license. This is a patient-facing one. So this is something that we built in partnership with Jackson Health down in Miami. Dialectical behavior patients do a daily diary, and these are folks who are in a program to treat addiction, self-harm. So a lot of the things that they're putting into these daily forms that the therapist doesn't see until they see them week to week could raise some red flags. And this is a way that they're able to affect behavior change, which is a lot of times the ultimate goal of training anyways. But using some of these approaches to training that we developed in the course of building out Capillary deployed medicine to support a distributed patient population. And that's never been more important than in the last year, when it was very, very hard to get in and see a doctor face to face. We're also seeing a lot of adoption now in the med device space. So similarly, product support is a matter of getting expertise that's centralized in these product manufacturers out to the end users. And again, it's never been harder than in the last year for these experts to get into hospitals and do face-to-face training with the people that are depending on them to get up to speed on the tools that they use to achieve optimal healthcare outcomes. So we're seeing now that folks are finding a lot of use in Capillary to ramp people up to those in-service trainings, and then also ramp them down and make sure that the skills are staying fresh in their minds. This is one that's launching. I guess it's in the App Store now, but they're actually launching the program this month. So LAPD is the first or second largest department in the country. And they provide a lot of training to precincts around the state of California that don't necessarily have the same level of resources that LAPD does. And with a lot of the new training that is now being handed down from the state level, especially with the events of the last year, they're finding that in order to be able to scale the support that they're offering to those other precincts, they needed a tool like Capillary to get that information from the experts at LAPD out to those precincts that are depending on them. And this is funded by a grant from the state of California. And the hope is that if the program goes well, that it'll become a permanent program in the state, and they might even be able to offer that to precincts around the country. Lastly, this is a fun one. This is a small group started by Air Force veterans up in New Hampshire. New England UAV teaches remote aviation skills, drone piloting. And they have a program called 1,000 Drones for 1,000 Girls. It's grant funded, and it's going to bring drones to young women around the country who are interested in developing what's one of the fastest growing, the demand for this skill set is one of the fastest growing across any industry. And so they'll be using Capillary as the tool for delivering their remote training. So that's a quick survey of some of the projects that we've been working on now with a more diverse set of customers than just DoD, but pretty much everything that we're doing with these groups has been facilitated and enabled by the research that Matt's been directing, and we're really excited to see it start growing in a real way now.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the variety of things that it can be used for outside of the DoD, you could imagine the same thing within the DoD. So you could imagine, maintenance training videos and other content to be pulled into another instance of Capillary that still makes use of all the great development that's been done under deployed medicine, even if it's for a non-medical purpose. And we've already got more medical purposes that we're in the process of working on in terms of surgical combat casualty care being integrated into deployed medicine. But you could imagine a lot of other use cases within, and Colin covered the without, the DoD being able to leverage this kind of capability.
Awesome, guys. Hey, fantastic job. I think you covered a tremendous amount of ground. And, I think one of the things that gets overlooked is what was that initial catalyst that really just kind of shocked me. And that was that 2001 to 2011 study that showed of the 4,000 combat casualties that 90% of those deaths could have been prevented with proper care. Or rather, 90% were losses to hemorrhaging. And of those, 75% probably could have been spared. And we could have saved those young men and women's lives out in the field. So I think, the genesis for the program really gets lost in what you've done so far, along the roads to solve not just that problem, but so many more. So I want to congratulate you on that. And I hope that is paying dividends in the field. So maybe you can give us a quick stat on, what you've seen so far in the field in terms of addressing the combat casualties with the software.
Sure. So I think we have seen improvements in terms of the level of, I'm going to say, standardization across the services in terms of how they train TC3 at various sites, at least for tiers 1 and 2, since we haven't pushed tier 3 out yet. In terms of seeing a change in casualty percentages or reducing the number of preventable deaths, that is a very, very difficult thing to trace back to a training intervention. And to be quite frank, it's still a little bit too early. Usually those are a pretty significant time delay from where we can analyze the casualties using something like the trauma registry and say, okay, this could have been prevented. And, oh, by the way, this person has had all these training interventions that we're trying to get them. But I think we will get there. And when I'm just going to say anecdotally, when we hear from trainees that this is the best content that they've ever been able to see, and that they knew exactly where to get it, and that they can show their friends, or they have a buddy who's an EMT that they were able to show this kind of stuff, to me, it tells me that what we're doing is working when our users just use it as much as they do. And the feedback has just been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, there's another aspect to this too, as far as like catalysts go, because, and I think this is more relevant now than ever. One of the things that I think really motivated the adoption of this type of program was the Ebola crisis. The military was on the ground, and everyone was having to learn donning and doffing PPE on the fly, and a lot of that was being sent around with PowerPoints attached to emails, and who knows which version it is, and the protocol is changing every day. So, one of the things I think that is really a sign of good governance is that instead of reacting to a disaster, as some groups have done over the course of the last year, and saying, hey, how can we fix this now? They said, okay, we're going to deal with this as best we can, because we're not going to be able to necessarily come up with a brand new solution that's going to address COVID in the next few months. And what the DoD did was say, this is going to happen again. And we need to make sure that there is a system out there that is demonstrably capable of pushing out standards-based resources that can be updated on the fly. And so that I think that really helped catalyze people to take on T3C as the initial use case for demonstrating that capability.
Sure, absolutely. So I see lots of applications, especially rapidly getting that content out, like you said, like the Ebola or casualty care, but you could think about hurricane preparedness. You could think about disaster relief, flooding, or famine, or any number of things that can go into where you need to educate a lot of people very quickly on the fly, and they're already on the move. So they may be trying to catch up while they're in transit on what's the latest procedure, what's the latest material that's available to them. So I think it's a pretty cool application of what you guys have done. So when we teased this, we initially called it, is it a unicorn? I mean, because really what you've done and what I've kind of picked up on the conversation is, yeah, you are a little bit of a unicorn in terms of how you've been able to maturate the program and the content and push it forward. And I think there's some keys to success that a lot of people that are on this call can probably pick up on. One is their use of agile technology and rapid prototyping, involving your customer, not just the DHA, but others rapidly into the process for developing. So you weren't just developing it blind. You were not just doing it on your own, but you had that input. You are pioneering SaaS, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but it is where we're headed commercially in terms of what the world is doing. And, you're a little bit of the bleeding edge for the government side. And then I think too that you early on have that end customer in mind and laid out and was actively involved in your product development. So I think those are like the 4 key takeaways that when I listen to you speak, I picked up on. And maybe there's some others that you could expand on, or just maybe I overlooked, because we are seeing some questions coming up on that topic now. Yeah,
well, I mean, the importance of getting the tool in the hands of the users cannot be understated. Some of the most influential conversations that we've had in the feature set that we've scheduled out for development in Capillary came from sitting down with someone in a Mystic, was it Medical Simulation Training Center, and running them through the paces and then getting the feedback directly. And I feel like we were very lucky to be able to get that kind of feedback. And I think that if you go to the app stores and you see the deployed medicine comments and whatnot, then that's reflected in what people are saying about the app.
Yeah, and I would have to say I give a lot of credit to Allogy, and for vendors who are out there, flexibility is really key in something like this. And there were a lot of requirements that really fell by the wayside that we thought were going to be really important, that ended up getting very much deprioritized or dropped entirely to be replaced by other things. And Allogy did a terrific job of being responsive to that. And that's not always a very easy thing when you've sort of planned out a work structure to say, okay, we're going to tackle X, Y, Z going forward. And then all of a sudden X goes into the trash can. How do you shift that around? And that's a challenge for any software developer. Allogy did a great job in that. But in the end, it resulted in something that was really tailored very nicely to user needs.
Awesome. Here's one that that just came up on the board is, and it's more about the commercialization and approaching the commercial medical scene. Is any tips to share on how to best approach a hospital system like Jackson, like you've already done, and get them on board? And they asked, for example, did you reach out to a C-level directly or one of the doctors? Was it a bottom-up or a top-down type of a push? Or everything all in?
Yeah, I think I tried to answer, and I should have done it in the thread, so that was my mistake. But so that one, I think it was actually like 3.5 years of socializing some of these ideas with the folks at the top of Jackson's IT department, and then also getting buy-in from clinical teams. So if you don't have a clinical champion in the hospital, then you're just not going to get anything done, because the IT is a cost department. Its job is to serve the other parts of the hospital. So right. Unless you're providing like an analytics dashboard or something that really enhances the value that IT can offer, you're just giving them more work. So you have to have physicians are great. In my experience, nurses a lot of the times are, more so the front line, and also, kind of set the tone for care delivery and patient interactions. And so those are great people to develop relationships with, understand their problems, demonstrate that you can provide value to them, and then they will be your champions to administration.
Awesome. So Link had a question about what's the best way for a successful company to get engaged and be more successful and find those contracts. And I think, Matt, I saw you kind of push something out there about go defend this and that sort of thing. But I want you to, both of you have very close access and ties to Team Orlando. And I think that may be one of those things that makes a significant difference, is your proximity, but also those relationships that you develop by circling around. So maybe you can expand on, I know this has been a long time and you've come out of the incubator, but you've both been in this area for a long time. Tell us a bit more about what it takes to get to know the Team Orlando crew here.
Yeah, so it's not easy. So there's a lot of players in the game. From a government side, it can be very difficult to keep up with everything that industry is doing. So it's a challenge for us to sort of ingest all of the great new stuff that people are doing. And it's a frustration for industry, because a lot of times you hear them say, we've got this thing, why didn't you just come to us? And the answer is usually, we didn't know you had it. And there's not any silver bullet to fix that, but collaboration spaces like this is a great way to start. Of course, events like ITSIC and other places where you can network and make sure that you're talking to as many people as you can are really important. And I know that there's been a big push from the government to increase government engagement in those things. I know that the Navy in particular has been very forward-leaning in these kinds of spaces. And you've seen tremendous success with things like SoftWorks, right? Which is meant to be a very nice place for the soft community to interact with industry. You come in, you have pitch days, you have other things. And I think doing more of those and making sure that we continue to have that government, input and engagement there is really key to making sure that if there is a terrific, capability that's out there, that we get it into the hands of the right people and the right people know about it.
Matt, I couldn't have asked you for, oh, go ahead, Colin.
Oh, I was just going to say, we had the advantage of starting the company at Institute for Simulation and Training and in the Metal Lab. And I mean, that network is phenomenal, but even if you're not, faculty or working with one of these labs, they do have really awesome events where you're able to socialize with some of the people that have had a huge influence on my thinking when it comes to training software, and then also introduced us to, a lot of the customers I just showed at the end of the slide deck.
So the two of you couldn't have teed it up any better for me, and we're coming to the top of the hour, and so I want to take a few minutes to, one, thank you for your time. And also, I think your product and the way you've done this is fantastic. And I think the audience has learned a lot. But you've really teed it up nicely. You mentioned SoftWorks, but we also have a new organization here, the Central Florida Tech Grove. And we are doing exactly that, designed for Team Orlando. So for those of you in the audience, I want you to be aware that we do have this capability of this networking, the socialization, in the space that you see behind me. And I'll try not to make it too dizzy. But you can see that we have this collaboration space that we are now building out, and it's meant for interaction with the academia. It's meant for interaction with Team Orlando, and it's really designed to find those non-traditional solutions and bring them forward to the service branches. So I want to encourage everybody to reach out to me, and I have a slide here real quick, and my email is down on the bottom. So if you are interested in connecting with us and understanding a little bit more about what we're doing at the Tech Grove, there's my email address. But I also want to put out there that on the 22nd of April, we're having our very first SIBR showcase. And it's really designed to highlight 16 of the companies that are been working with Team Orlando over the last 2 years to bring forward from SIBR 1 and Phase 2 to a commercialization, and talk about what they're doing, but also give them that exposure that they need to some of the commands, some of the large prime contractors that are out there, and really create that synergy from these non-traditional solutions and bring them together. So the registration is right there. It's a TG Partner Showcase at Bitly. Take a screenshot, snap it, and go ahead and register and join us on the 22nd. And on behalf of the NTSA and behalf of Sense Forward Tech Bro, Colin and Matt, thank you very much. I mean, this was great. I really enjoyed the presentation. You did a bang up job. So I appreciate it, guys. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. And I dropped my contact info in the chat if anybody needs it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Safe.